Simon Cowell finally names the 5 worst judges he ever worked with. For years, Simon Cowell built his empire on one simple rule: say what everyone else is afraid to say. He crushed dreams, created stars, and turned brutal honesty into billion-dollar television. Sitting behind those judging desks, he wasn't just another critic, he was the authority. But here's what rarely gets talked about. While Simon judged thousands of contestants, there were a few people he never seemed comfortable judging openly. The ones sitting right beside him. Judges who challenged his control, embarrassed him on live television, or exposed cracks in the image he worked so hard to protect. Simon almost never publicly names his worst judges. He doesn't have to. The tension, the blow-ups, the on-air moments that went too far, they already told the story. Tonight, we're breaking down the 5 judges who clashed hardest with Simon Cowell, the ones who pushed him, humiliated him, or forced him to show his real side. And once you see how each of these relationships ended, you'll understand why some names were never spoken but never forgotten. Number 5. Howard Stern. Howard Stern was never hired to be agreeable. When America's Got Talent brought him in, they weren't looking for warmth or encouragement, they wanted disruption. Stern had built his entire career on saying the thing everyone else avoided, and for a while that energy worked perfectly inside the AGT machine. At first, Stern and Simon Cowell looked aligned. Both were blunt. Both understood shock value. Both knew controversy sold. But there was a fundamental difference between them that would eventually blow everything up. Simon criticizes individuals. Howard criticizes systems. And once Stern started pulling at the system behind the judges' table, there was no putting it back together. When Stern joined AGT in 2012, he brought legitimacy from a completely different media universe. He wasn't dependent on the show. He didn't need the exposure. His radio empire already gave him a platform bigger than most television judges could dream of. That independence mattered, because it meant Stern wasn't afraid of consequences. As the seasons went on, Stern started noticing something he didn't like. Decisions felt less organic. Moments felt more manufactured. Talent mattered, but branding mattered more. He hinted, subtly at first, that the show was becoming less about discovery and more about optics. Then, after his departure, the gloves came off. In interviews and on his radio show, Stern didn't just criticize AGT. He criticized Simon Cowell's pattern across all his shows. And this is where things crossed into dangerous territory for Simon. Stern accused him of creating an environment where male judges were protected no matter what, while female judges were constantly cycled out for younger replacements. That accusation hit hard, because it wasn't framed as bitterness. It was framed as observation. Stern openly pointed out that men on Simon's panels seemed to age in place, untouched, while women were replaced again and again. It wasn't a personal insult, it was a structural indictment. And when that narrative enters the public conversation, it doesn't disappear quietly. What made Stern especially threatening wasn't volume, it was credibility. He wasn't a former contestant. He wasn't a tabloid voice. He was a peer. Someone who understood television power from the inside. And unlike others on this list, Stern didn't explode on camera. He didn't need a viral moment. He let his words circulate slowly, through interviews, commentary, and long-form rants that fans dissected line by line. Each time he spoke, he reframed Simon not as the brutally honest judge, but as a calculated executive making image-based decisions. That shift is subtle, but devastating. Because Simon's authority depends on the belief that he's telling the truth as he sees it. Stern suggested that truth was filtered, curated, optimized for branding. From Simon's perspective, that's unforgivable. Stern didn't embarrass him on a single night. He planted doubt in the audience's mind. And doubt is far harder to erase than outrage. That's why Howard Stern earns this spot. Not because he was loud, not because he was rude, but because he said something that couldn't be laughed off, edited around, or dismissed as drama. He questioned whether Simon Cowell was the judge, or the puppet master. And once that question is asked, the entire panel starts to look different. But if Stern challenged Simon from a distance, the next judge did it up close, on live television, in a moment where power was supposed to be shared and wasn't. Number 4. Howie Mandel. For most viewers, Howie Mandel has always felt harmless. He smiles, he jokes, He diffuses tension. On America's Got Talent, he became the emotional safety net the judge contestants could breathe around. While others intimidated or critiqued, Howie reassured that role wasn't accidental, it was earned over years. Which is exactly why his clash with Simon Cowell mattered more than it first appeared. By the time Simon officially joined AGT as a judge, Howie had already been there for years. He helped define the show's tone. He knew what worked, what didn't, and how fragile contestants could be under pressure. But Simon didn't arrive as a peer, he arrived as the architect, the man whose name carried more weight than the rules themselves. From that moment on, the panel stopped being a circle. It became a ladder. On camera, the dynamic still looked playful. Simon teased Howie. Howie laughed it off. To casual viewers, it felt like friendly banter, but subtle changes started creeping in. Simon framed performances before others could speak. He redirected conversations. He positioned his opinions as conclusions rather than suggestions. And Howie noticed. The tension wasn't explosive at first. It was quiet, the kind that builds when someone keeps stepping just a little past the line, and no one stops them. That's what made the golden buzzer moment so revealing. The golden buzzer isn't just a dramatic button, it's symbolic power. Each judge gets a limited opportunity to use it, and that limitation is what makes it meaningful. When it's your turn, it's your moment, your authority, your call. That night, it was Howie's turn. The act delivered something rare, not just talent, but timing. The crowd reacted instantly. The panel stood. Emotion filled the room. This was exactly the kind of moment the show was designed to protect. And then Simon stood up. Without hesitation. Without checking. Without permission. He reached for the buzzer. What followed wasn't comedy. It was exposure. Howie protested immediately, saying he felt abused. That word didn't come from nowhere. It came from someone who realized in real time that tenure didn't matter, rules didn't matter, turns didn't matter, because Simon could override all of it whenever he felt justified. Simon tried to laugh it off, claimed excitement, claimed instinct, but instinct doesn't explain why the rules only bend in one direction. And this wasn't isolated. Around the same period, Simon pushed for more golden buzzers. First 2, then more flexibility, then additional power during live rounds. The structure kept changing, always expanding authority upward, never outward. To Simon, this probably felt logical. He built the franchises. He knew what made moments viral. Why limit yourself? But to Howie, it confirmed something unsettling. This wasn't collaboration. It was hierarchy. Howie had spent years protecting contestants from unnecessary humiliation, making sure the show still felt human. Simon's approach was different. Moments mattered more than people. Impact mattered more than fairness. And when those philosophies collided, Simon didn't compromise. What makes Howie's place on this list so important is how he handled it. He didn't yell. He didn't campaign. He didn't turn bitter. He let the audience see the imbalance for themselves. And once viewers notice that imbalance, they can't unsee it. The golden buzzer stopped looking like a shared privilege. The panel stopped looking equal. Simon stopped looking like just another judge. That's why Howie Mandel earns number 4. Not because he fought Simon loudly, but because his quiet resistance revealed a truth Simon never wanted highlighted. On that panel, authority doesn't rotate. It belongs to one person. Number 3. Mel B. Mel B didn't come to America's Got Talent to be molded. She arrived with decades of fame behind her, a career built on confidence, and a personality that didn't soften itself for anyone. As a Spice Girl, she had already learned how brutal the spotlight could be, and how quickly entertainment can slide into exploitation. At first, her chemistry with Simon Cowell felt electric. Simon teased. Mel pushed back. The audience ate it up. It looked like classic TV tension, two strong personalities sparring for laughs. But what viewers didn't realize was that Mel B was often bringing something real to the table: empathy. When contestants broke down, when stories hit close to home, she didn't hide it. She felt it. And that emotional openness became her defining trait on the panel. That's also what made her vulnerable. On the night everything blew up, Mel was already emotionally exposed. A young contestant's performance had reminded her of her father, who had recently passed away after a long illness. She was visibly shaken, fighting tears, trying to stay composed under the studio lights. Anyone paying attention could see it. Simon chose that moment to make a joke. Turning to Mel, he compared the performance to her wedding night, saying there had been a lot of anticipation, but not much delivery. It was crude, it was personal, and most importantly, it was dismissive of her emotional state. The room froze. Mel didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She picked up her drink and threw it directly at Simon, stood up, and walked off the set. For a split second, the entire illusion of a controlled television environment collapsed. This wasn't scripted tension, this was a real reaction. Later, Mel explained that the joke wasn't harmless banter. It was the final push after an already overwhelming night. She openly said Simon's comment was inappropriate, and that there comes a point where brutal honesty becomes plain disrespect. In her own words, if someone crosses that line, they shouldn't be shocked when there are consequences. What made this moment so revealing wasn't the drink. It was Simon's response. He brushed it off. No real apology, no acknowledgement of the emotional context. The incident was treated as an amusing viral moment rather than a serious boundary being crossed. And that response said more than any insult ever could, because it showed that Simon's style works best when emotions are kept at arm's length. When judges are armored, when vulnerability is optional, Mel B shattered that assumption by bringing real feeling into a space that thrived on control. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, the tension didn't fully disappear. Over the years, reports surfaced about fractured relationships behind the scenes, judges keeping distance, choosing sides, and navigating an environment that felt increasingly divided. Mel was often described as selective about who she engaged with, closer to some judges, distant from others. And once again, Simon stayed silent. He didn't step in to reset the dynamic. He didn't mediate. He let the fractures exist. The next judge didn't explode at all. She waited. She watched. And when she finally spoke, the damage was far deeper and far more permanent. Number 2. Sharon Osbourne. Sharon Osbourne was never supposed to be expendable. That's what made her fallout with Simon Cowell so unsettling. When Sharon joined the X Factor, she didn't arrive as a fresh face or a risky hire. She came in as a proven force, a manager who survived decades in an industry that chews people up, a woman who had already built and rebuilt careers, and someone who understood exactly how television power works. She wasn't dazzled by Simon, she wasn't intimidated by him, and she definitely wasn't dependent on him. That alone made her different. On camera, Sharon and Simon looked like controlled chaos. They argued, laughed, and clashed in ways that felt organic. Viewers believed they were equals, two sharp personalities sparring for entertainment. But behind the scenes, Sharon slowly realized that the balance people saw wasn't real. Simon always had the final say. For a long time, Sharon accepted that reality, until it cost her something she couldn't ignore. Years after leaving the X Factor, Sharon revealed that she had been offered a major role on The Masked Singer US, a show that would have placed her back at the center of mainstream television. It was a chance to reinvent her public image, reach a new audience, and stay relevant in an industry that moves fast and forgets faster. She turned it down for one reason. She was contractually locked into another season of The X Factor under Simon Cowell. Then everything collapsed. That season never happened. The show was suddenly scrapped, and the opportunity Sharon had sacrificed vanished with it. According to Sharon, when she questioned what went wrong, the explanation she was given wasn't vague or diplomatic. She claimed Simon said she was too old and that they needed someone younger. That accusation reframed everything. This wasn't about creative direction. It wasn't about ratings. It was about image. And for Sharon, that cut deeper than losing a job. It suggested that years of loyalty, contribution, and credibility could be erased by a single metric she couldn't change. Age. What made this moment explosive wasn't just the comment itself. It was the pattern Sharon said it confirmed. She publicly accused Simon's shows of operating like a boys' club where men were allowed to age, stay comfortable, and keep their seats, while women were quietly replaced once they stopped fitting the preferred look. According to Sharon, the system protected male judges while pitting women against each other for relevance. And she didn't stop there. Sharon went further, claiming that many of the explosive feuds between female judges weren't accidental at all. She suggested that conflicts, particularly between herself and Danny Minogue, were encouraged, even orchestrated, because they made compelling television. Insults became storylines, humiliation became content, all while Simon stayed above it. That silence mattered. Because Simon wasn't just another judge caught in the chaos, he controlled the environment. He shaped the narrative, and according to Sharon, he allowed the damage to happen because it served the show. When Sharon finally spoke about all this years later, she didn't sound emotional or bitter. She sounded resolved. She said she would never work with Simon again. Not for money, not for nostalgia, not for redemption. Whatever bond viewers thought existed between them was gone. And that's why Sharon Osbourne ranks number 2. She didn't just accuse Simon of being rude or difficult. She accused him of building a system where women were disposable once they stopped being profitable. That kind of accusation doesn't fade. It doesn't get edited out. And it doesn't disappear with time. It changes how people look back at the entire era. And yet, even after Sharon stripped away the image, questioned the system, and walked away for good, Number 1. Paula Abdul. Paula Abdul wasn't just another judge sitting next to Simon Cowell. She was the emotional counterweight that made his entire persona work. And that's exactly why their relationship became the most complicated, revealing, and damaging one of his career. When American Idol launched in the early 2000s, the chemistry looked effortless. Randy Jackson played the middle ground. Simon Cowell delivered cold, cutting honesty. Paula Abdul brought warmth, empathy, and encouragement. Together they formed a perfect triangle: authority, balance, and heart. Millions tuned in every week because that contrast felt real. But behind the scenes, it was anything but simple. Years later, Simon admitted something that quietly shattered the illusion. He said that during the early seasons of American Idol, he and Paula couldn't even travel on the same plane together. That wasn't a scheduling issue or a professional disagreement. That was personal discomfort, so intense it required physical separation. And then Simon did what he often does best. He reframed it publicly. In interviews, he suggested the tension came from intimate feelings on Paula's side, even laughing as he implied she wanted him 1,000,000%. Framed as humor, the comment landed as humiliation. In one sentence, Simon reduced a respected professional, a Grammy-winning performer and choreographer, to a punchline centered on desire rather than expertise. Paula never confirmed his version. Instead, she deflected with jokes, once saying that sitting next to Simon for years left her permanently damaged with a British accent. But humor was armor. Behind it was exhaustion. Paula was the only woman on the panel, absorbing criticism from contestants, pressure from producers, and constant public scrutiny, all while being subtly undermined by the man who controlled the show. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. Then came 2005. A former contestant made accusations that exploded across headlines and threatened to end Paula's career overnight. Investigations were launched. Media scrutiny intensified. Her integrity was suddenly questioned on a global scale. Paula denied the claims, and no evidence of wrongdoing was found, but the damage was immediate and brutal. This is where the story becomes complicated, because when Paula's reputation was on the line, Simon didn't distance himself. He defended her. Paula later admitted that Simon was extremely protective and supportive during that crisis. The same man who publicly embarrassed her became her strongest ally behind the scenes. That contradiction is what made their relationship so volatile. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't rivalry, it was emotional inconsistency. Moments of cruelty followed by moments of loyalty, and that inconsistency took a toll. Paula later spoke about how isolating the job felt, how being the only woman on the panel amplified every moment of tension. She admitted there were days she would shut herself in her dressing room just to escape the atmosphere. The pressure wasn't just professional, it was psychological. Eventually, Paula left American Idol. The panel moved on. The show evolved, and for a time it seemed like that chapter was closed, but it wasn't. Years later, Paula reunited with Simon on The X Factor. On the surface, it looked like reconciliation. Nostalgia, two old colleagues finding common ground again. But the underlying dynamic never truly healed. The imbalance remained. The history followed them. Unlike the other judges on this list, Paula didn't challenge Simon's authority with accusations, confrontations, or public campaigns. She did something far more unsettling. She exposed his contradictions. Through their relationship, audiences saw moments of arrogance and moments of genuine care, moments of control and moments of vulnerability. Simon Cowell, the carefully constructed television titan, became human, flawed, reactive, and emotionally inconsistent. And that is why Paula Abdul ranks number 1. Not because Simon hated her, not because she was the most confrontational, but because she revealed something no other judge ever did, that even the most powerful man in talent television could be thrown off balance, not by rebellion, but by proximity. Paula wasn't just a judge beside Simon Cowell. She was the mirror he never learned how to manage. Simon Cowell didn't become a global force by being agreeable. He became powerful by controlling narratives, shaping panels, and making sure the spotlight always bent in his direction. But the judges on this list did something rare. They disrupted that control. Some challenged his authority, some exposed the rules he rewrote, and one revealed the cracks he could never fully cover up. So the real question isn't whether these were the worst judges Simon Cowell ever worked with. It's whether they were simply the ones who refused to play by his rules. Let us know which clash surprised you the most. And if you think Simon Cowell's honesty was ever just an act, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and click the next video to see what television legends never wanted you to notice.